Good morning, everybody. Can we make a start, please? Apologies that we're sort of 10 minutes late starting this morning. It's been a little bit busy this morning. Great to see such a good turnout. Thank you to everybody. We'll do introductions once we've elected the chair. Just to sort of outline that the purpose of today's meeting is to allow you a strategic sort of overview of the budget as a whole. So, for the benefit of members of the public to be aware that all of the select committees have scrutinised the budget in relation to the remits of their individual committees, this is an opportunity, it's an additional opportunity that's provided over and above the normal scrutiny arrangements to allow you an opportunity to question the executive directly on their proposals relating to the budget for the next year. So this is an opportunity that's not provided to all members in other authorities. So it's an opportunity for frank, open, honest debate with Cabinet today. So questions are likely to be less specific than perhaps in some of the select committee meetings, should be focused on priorities and risks. And we're going to elect the chair in a moment, and also a vice chair, and she would like to set some sort of procedure rules as well in terms of the conduct of today's meeting. But essentially the questions should be directed to Cabinet members, with officers just providing sort of technical backup. We do have a member of the public that would like to attend today's meeting, and he is due to arrive a little bit later on today, and it will be up to the committee. It will be their discretion as to whether to allow that member of the public to speak today and ask any questions. We don't have public open forums on all scrutiny agendas, simply on the ordinary ones, and today is a special meeting, so it will be the discretion of members here today, scrutiny members, as to whether they would like to allow public contributions to today's meeting. So can we just make sure that all mobile phones are please switched to silent, and we shall start with electing a chair for today's meeting. Could I have nominations please for a chair? Councillor Powell?
Councillor Jane Pratt.
Could I have a seconder please? Councillor Feakins. Okay, Councillor Pratt, if you would like to come forward. Could we have nominations please for a vice chair for today? Councillor Jones?
Matt Feakins.
Councillor Feakins. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Clark. Councillor Feakins, if you'd like to come and be today's vice chair. In the meantime, can we take some apologies for absence, please?
Yeah, we've got apologies today from Councillors Batruni, Blakeborough, Edwards, Harris, Thomas, Watts, and also Parent Governor Representative Mike Fowler.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting at which we're going to scrutinise the budget. I'd like to reiterate what Hazel has said this morning. We're very fortunate to be able to have this meeting at this council. It's not a meeting that is an opportunity that's given to many councils, as she's pointed out, and we certainly wouldn't want to abuse that. And I would ask all members that we have a constructive meeting this morning, and that we don't, we're respectful of one another, and that members don't argue with one another. All questions will need to come through the chair to the Cabinet members. So I respectfully ask everybody to make sure that that happens today. So can I ask, first of all, are there any declarations of interest? I'll take them as and when. And I understand that Councillor Eason.
Yeah, what is our position of chairs of governors of schools and the budget matters?
Councillor Eason, if you would like to approach Wendy after the meeting and fill in the necessary form. Thank you.
As we're all aware, there have been some changes in the last 2 months to the budget, and there has been a budget gap that's had to be found. Some of you have also had the benefit of feedback from the public, and obviously the Cabinet members are here today to answer your questions. So I think, as Councillor Richard John has a pressing meeting elsewhere today, we'll be taking his portfolio first. But I would like to ask Councillor Murphy to introduce the budget proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and there we are. Yes, lovely to see a good turnout. I got a slide deck here. It's only a couple of 37 slides. I'm going to go through it quite quickly. At the end of it, you'll see a lot of detail. You actually have it. It was forwarded to you this morning. My apologies that it only came to you this morning. Peter and I actually finalised it at about 9:30 this morning, so you couldn't have had it any earlier. The scrutiny sessions that you've already had went into an awful lot of detail about what the proposals were based on the information available to us last November. As the Chair has pointed out, an awful lot has happened since then, and we've had considerable additional pressures put on. So what I'm going to concentrate on today is the differences between the budget as it is now and what went out to consultation. So looking at the overall position, you'll be aware, and this slide was on the previous presentation, that we've had to take some 15 million pounds worth of pressures, additional pressures out, and deliver 23 million of savings. And that clear expectation that we had in November of the austerity for public services continuing is certainly true. You'll be aware that we had a disappointing provisional settlement from Welsh Government, and there was limited improvement in the final settlement, and I'll come on to that later on. The draft proposals led to a small shortfall, but you'll recall that when the month 7 budget monitoring figures came out, there was a hard core of additional pressures amounting to some 1.6 million that's, well, hardcore. They weren't going to go away. Some of it was revisited, and more about that in a minute. But the market-driven pressures that we had amounted to that 1.6 million. And in addition, we had the pay award that was announced that gave us a pressure of another 1.3 million. And as I said, the final settlement was disappointing. There was no support for rurality, which we've had in previous years, or the pay award. And there was some talk initially of a consequential coming through with regards to the pay award, but in reality, that didn't happen. So we had to develop further proposals, and we looked very hard at procurement and commissioning. We looked even further at high-cost placements across looked after children and ALN provision, complete review of transport. We looked to see whether our service delivery was being optimised. We looked at fees and charges again. We looked at further opportunities for automation. We revisited the reviews that had been previously done and looked to see if we could take any more commercial opportunities. Again, we're always looking at workforce efficiencies and a complete review of all of the pressures that we'd looked at before. If you look at the medium-term financial plan, you'll see in the 18-19 column that we now have achieved a balanced budget position. But there is still, even now, on the basis of the information that's available to us, and of course we don't know what Welsh Government are going to do, gone are the days when you had meaningful indicative settlements. There's still some 9.2 million in the pipeline to be handled by 21-22. And as the more seasoned hands here know, we always end up with at least 5 million that we've got to find, and we can see 3.5 of it already for the following year. So a lot of pressure still to come based on information currently available to us. And everybody will be familiar with this slide, but the reason that it's in there again is that the gap between our funding and the others is growing. We're now at some 62% of Blaenau Gwent's funding on a per capita basis. You know, the gap is growing. It's becoming more and more difficult to manage. So coming back to where you were originally, we went out to consultation with a draft set of budget proposals with a shortfall of 243,000. Cabinet decided that it was not happy with charging for parking for blue badge holders, and we were uncomfortable with the charge for the childcare element of before school clubs. That used to be breakfast clubs, but we don't call it that anymore. So the adjusted shortfall, again, based on the information that you had when you did your scrutiny sessions, comes to 483,000. So we looked again at the pressures, managed to take 538,000 out, but in the process had inherited 2.6 of additional pressures, and the same exercise was carried out with regards to savings. So when you take the final settlement changes into account and some readjustment of treasury management, etc., we ended up with the balanced budget. So the budget for 18-19 will see a further growth in social care budgets, particularly in adult social care. And I understand the gentleman who is likely to attend from the public will be asking questions on that. School spending is prioritised and maintained above 17-18 cash levels, including funding for the pay award, and I'll come to that again in a minute. Our commitment to meet the living wage continues, and as does the drive for service efficiency and income generation. And we're looking all the time at new operating models so that we can maintain all local services, which still remains Cabinet's priority. For those who know what their council tax band is, you'll be aware that we modelled on 3.95%. We announced at the initial consultation that Cabinet was recommending to Council on Thursday, that's if we're not snowed off, that council tax is set at 4.95% increase. But that will give you an indication there of the MCC element of council tax rises. Don't forget that that can be affected by the police precept and your town and community council precepts. I'm aware that some town and community councils have increased their precepts quite substantially, so that might have an impact. But somewhere around 5% overall is probably what the overall increase will be. But as I say, MCC's element, if it's confirmed on Thursday, will be 4.95%. And just in case we aren't able to do it on Thursday because of the forecasted snow, we are looking at a date next week. I would ask people, if that situation arises, to do all you can to fit in with that. We have until the 10th legally to set the budget, so we're on borrowed time. So looking at schools, and I don't know how much pressure you're under, Richard, but I could stop after these next couple of slides, take questions on schools and carry on, but unless you ask me to, I'll keep going. So we said in that previous slide that we will be looking at an extra £500,000 worth of funding for schools. For the last couple of years, we've flatlined schools, but it's been a flatline minus in that we've kept their funding at existing levels, but passed on additional responsibilities and costs to them. School funding or school balances are suffering somewhat, albeit that the primary sector is more robust than the secondary sector. But we will be funding the additional exam fee costs of 167,000, and we will be funding the additional indicative pay award. So there's an extra 781,000 going in to schools. There will be some savings coming out of that, in that the federated school model is expected to save some 32,000. 117,000 coming out of the ISB regards to school maintenance, and that's on a sliding scale, which no doubt Richard can expand on, but it's basically the more modern schools. We're not anticipating the same level of maintenance costs, and there can be some savings there. And there's an adjustment to supplies and services budget. So overall, schools are getting an extra £500,000, which should give them a fair degree of support. Everybody is aware that we have invested substantial sums in our schools of late. Caldicot is now up and running. Monmouth will be ready and operating from September, and those schools have got brand new ICT in them. During the consultation sessions, we had a very, very useful one with quite a considerable number of school children in the choir hall in Caldicot. And one of the questions that we asked them was, if you didn't have a brand new building but had the very latest ICT provision, who would prefer to see that, or who would prefer to see the all singing, all dancing new buildings? There was a minority, but a significant one, that they moved to different sides of the room to vote, that moved over to I'm not too worried about the building, just give me the right IT section. And we thought that was quite telling. It was a majority for the new buildings, but there was a significant minority for the other alternatives. And we've been able to invest another 400,000, 200,000 each in enhanced ICT for King Henry and Abergavenny and Chepstow, so that those two schools don't miss out on the fact that they have to be in a different banding with regards to Welsh Government support for the reprovisioning of the schools. So schools have had that £500,000 so they don't have to meet the pay award and the exam fees, but those two schools in particular will have an extra amount for enhanced ICT. Other funding commitments, we announced previously that we would be putting £300,000 in, like we did last year, to top up the disabled facility grants. We've managed to be able to keep to that, so I can confirm that that extra 300,000 is remaining in the budget despite the pressures. And there will be additional highways projects, but they're funded by additional one-off Welsh Government capital grants. What we will not be pursuing, based on what you had before, was there will be not included in this budget additional car parking charges. We will maintain our commitment not to charge for parking for blue badge holders. There was a proposal to close the Usk and Troy recycling depots for 2 days a week. We will not be doing that. There was a proposal to reduce grass cutting. Consultation with the registered social landlords, particularly MHA, caused problems there, so we're going to pull that out. We'll not be getting rid of the mini sweeper. We won't be reducing the subsidised scheduled rural bus routes. But coming on to the increase in the preschool charging, it's been widely reported in the press that we were going to be charging £2 for that half an hour. That is not the case. But although I said initially that we'd be pulling that charge out, That hasn't been possible, but it won't be £2. We will actually be imposing a charge of £1 for that service. So looking at the pressures and the investment summary, you'll see in all of these charts now, a difference is that in the first column, there were the figures that you had when you first scrutinised the budget. The second column tells you the changes, and obviously the third is the total amount of additional pressures and investments that are going into the services. And there's a breakdown towards the end of this slide deck that will give you the figures if you want to raise questions of Cabinet members and officers. The sort of thing, and I'm not going to go through all of this, you can look at it yourself, the figures on all of these pressures indicate the changes. So the figures are the extra amounts that are going in on top of those that you saw before. And each of these slides is the same. So when you come back to ask questions of Cabinet members and officers, that'll give you an indication of the areas that were examined. And we had a team of some 18 senior officers look at this over an extended period, and they did an incredible amount of work to be able to come up with these proposals. With regards to the savings, same principle applies, original, change and final. So, and again, those are scheduled in the last slides. And again, there they are, and the differences are highlighted there against each section. So, there's this session today. The final budget proposals will go before Cabinet tomorrow, and hopefully on the 1st of March we'll be having our council tax setting session. I would ask you to ask as many questions as you can today, just in case we do have to have revised arrangements for the council tax setting day. I know people won't be able to resist the temptation of asking questions on that day, but let's try and get as many of them out of the way as we can, because we might have to be a little bit more flexible this year compared to others. So ongoing work, as you'll have gathered from the other slides, on due diligence and continuation of a programme of checking everything to make sure that we're as sharp as we possibly can be. More work on future Monmouthshire, and you'll know that we've confirmed an extra £200,000 worth of funding with regards to the future Monmouthshire work. Governance and alignment with core strategic planning frameworks. We're looking at everything across portfolios to see if we can find any managerial aspects of this which will help us in delivering the programmes. So coming back to what I was saying earlier, if you look, those are the summary of the pressures that we had, and again the next couple of slides now are showing you where the changes have taken place with regards to each particular directorate. So there's CYP, so SCH is there, extra money for looked after children. You'll see the budget pressures there in respect of enterprise. There was a 200,000 for future Monmouthshire and the 143,000 with regards to the ADM that we've looked at in recent meetings. Operations, you'll see extra pressure there with regards to the month 7, 472,000. I'm just picking the headlines here. You're free to look at anything that you want. The savings, again, they're all scheduled out here. You'll see the increase in charges to other authorities for residential places at Mountain House. There's the 125,000, it's the £1 charge in respect of before school clubs. And again, all the schedules are there, and in operations, quite a substantial list of changes, albeit that they're mostly savings in operations rather than additional pressures there. And resources, again, there they are. So that's the run through. My apologies for skipping some of the slides, but I think it's more to do with what you want to ask today rather than what I want to tell you. So if I can pass back to you, Chair, and we'll see where we go.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Murphy. I'm sure members found it extremely helpful that you've highlighted the changes in particular. And also, this is a golden opportunity for members to ask any questions at all. And we've seen from the process that's going to take place that there still may be things that may change. Before we actually start with the questions, can I just take an indication from members? We understand that a member of the public has arrived. Can you indicate if you are happy for that member of the public to have a platform this morning? That's agreed. Thank you very much. I'll ask Mr. Crowhurst to be brought into the chamber. As we haven't done introductions this morning, I would ask if, before you ask your question, if you could just state where you're from and your ward, etc., and introduce yourself. Obviously, officers are here today for technical clarification, and where some portfolios are unable to be here, for example, Councillor Jones, who I understand isn't at all well, then obviously the team, the Cabinet team, will answer those questions. So before we ask Councillor John to answer questions on his portfolio, can I just ask if there's any general questions on Councillor Murphy's budget proposals? Councillor Howard?
Yes, Madam Chairman. As Chair of Adult Select, I've just gone back to our agenda, which we discussed in January, reference to budget proposals, and that was a cancelled meeting from December. I do note that in these proposals that we have a major saving being made of some 700 and something thousand. Going back into the minutes there now of that meeting, there's nothing actually identified within them minutes which the Select discussed. And I think that's maybe one reason why we may have a member of the public with us here this morning. And we were informed within that meeting with Tyrone and the officers that actually the proposals that they were looking at weren't finalised yet. Now, we do have some indication now today about the finalisation of them budget proposals. So my point I'm making is actually what we're discussing today was never discussed within our budget proposals because we were informed that they weren't finalised in January. So I don't think we got much time really to get into depth with the savings made in adults and social care, which I'm really disappointed in because you've got to rubber stamp this tomorrow and it's got to go to council on Thursday. So I'd like to see some kind of written response from today from the head of social care and adults to the proposals of exactly what their savings are, because I could spend all day with it. I'm sure my select committee as well will be disappointed in not actually having the formation of what the savings were, because it is clearly identified in this document today what the savings are, and saying they were identified in our meeting, that is not the case. I've just been through them now. So I just need some clarity on that. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much for that question, Councillor Howarth. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Murphy?
Not really, Chair, except to say that, yes, I did say right at the beginning that this presentation, all the figures associated with it were put together. Well, Peter actually managed to collate it over the weekend, and we finalised them this morning. This has been a massive job of dealing with all the additional pressures that have come on us. And inevitably, There's a lot of this has come forward at the last minute because of the work that was having to be carried out. And I'm quite sure that Claire will be able to give a pretty fair indication as to where we are. I'm not sure that, though, that we won't be duplicating that when I assume it's Mr. Crowhurst who's coming in. He may well ask the same questions. I'm conscious of the fact that Councillor John has to go. Perhaps we could concentrate on CYP stuff and pick up Simon's point when Mr. Crowhurst comes in.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I think that's a very good suggestion. Are you happy with that, Councillor Howarth? Yes, no problem. Okay, fine. So are there any further questions to Councillor Murphy at this point? So thank you very much, Councillor Murphy. I think if we can ask Councillor John now, if you'd like to take questions. Did you want to come to the front, or are you happy taking them? Did you want to come and sit at the end here? I think that might be helpful. Right. Did you want to say anything before you take questions, Councillor John, or are you happy to go straight in?
I think Councillor Murphy has given a broad outline of each of the portfolios, so I'm happy to dive straight into questions.
Thank you very much. So I would ask questions. I know if we can start with the questions that Councillor Grocott has prepared.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points. One really is an attempt to be helpful to the administration. I believe that in Torvine, where universal credit has already been rolled out, the administration of free school meals has been transferred to their revenue team, and that the authority has set up an authority-wide support for people affected by those changes in the regime. They have found that one immediate thing has been a 12% increase in the take-up of free school meals. Now, obviously, in terms of looking at our budget, has this authority thought of following in those footsteps, because that would bring in increased deprivation grant? And I know it's not a huge amount in Monmouthshire, but nonetheless, in these chastened times, it might be a way in which the money coming in and available for education is increased. The second is perhaps to be a little more critical of potential changes to the budget here. We are very disappointed to see that after earlier comments, there is now to be an increase in charges for before-school clubs. We take the point that the administration is saying that the breakfast element is not an increase, but that the child care arrangement is what will be covered by that £1 charge that is being proposed. I think it is the view, certainly of the Labour group on the council, that you can look at people who need that uptake of those facilities, and there are very disparate reasons why people do. Sometimes it could be people with very highly paid jobs who need to be early into their offices, or indeed need to commute sometimes considerable distances. All too often, though, it's the view of our group that it is because people are really in considerable hardship, and that the provision of that facility before school is a tremendous help to them. This new charge will be a considerable blow and will increase levels of hardship. As a Labour group, we are extremely disappointed at that, and I wonder if you could give us any assurances that, if at all possible, you will be looking at ways in which that can be alleviated for our families in most poverty.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grocott. So if I could invite Councillor John to respond.
Thank you very much for those questions. On your first question about universal credit, and yes, that is something that Torvine are doing, and we're looking to do exactly the same thing in Monmouthshire. So as you correctly pointed out, there has been a 12% increase in uptake of free school meals in Torvine as a result of that measure they've taken. We might not expect the same sort of level of increase in uptake here, but if there are children who are eligible for free school meals, they should get free school meals. And as you mentioned, that in itself is a significant benefit. But there's also then the added benefit, which you mentioned in the pupil development grant, which for many of our deprived schools, that increase would be very welcome and would more accurately represent the support that school needs. So that is something we're actively pursuing at the moment. And as you say, it does seem to have worked well in Torvine. On the before school clubs, as you will have seen from the budget, this is not something we wanted to introduce. None of us stood for election last year to take these difficult decisions, but we have to take these difficult decisions. So as you can see from Councillor Murphy's presentation, there was a consideration of a £2 charge. That would have made us the highest charging local authority in Wales. There are a number of, I think at least 7 local authorities which charge for the before school club. Those charges vary from about 75p to £1.50. So by settling at £1, we're certainly mid-range of what local authorities do charge. Now, there's a choice here, and I think there's also a question about fairness. Is it fair that a family on a fixed or limited income pays extra in council tax to subsidise free childcare for people who may be very wealthy? Because at the moment, that's what's happening. We see a lot of people who will drop off their children at 8 o'clock and they can drive off to very, very well-paid jobs. Now, we considered the impact on the most vulnerable. So any children eligible for free school meals will not pay the charge for the before school club. And as it's implemented, we're looking at a September implementation. We'll see how that works, and if there are concerns that are raised, we'll look at those, and we're very prepared to see how this beds in, to see how it works, and if there are issues, if there are people being penalised, if there are large families, perhaps with 3, 4, 5 siblings, all in primary school, all paying this charge, perhaps that's something we can look at. But as I say, we've had some very difficult decisions to make here. And there is another option. You don't have to charge for the before school club. We could do what some local authorities in South East Wales have done and say, actually, we'll remove that free childcare element. So your before school club will start at 8:30. Well, actually, we think that might be more difficult for working families, because you won't have the option at all to drop off your children at 8 o'clock and hopefully be in work for 9 a.m. So this is a choice, and families have a choice as to whether they put their children into the before school club or not. We've tried to do it in as fair way as possible, and as I say, we will consider how it's implemented, and if there are issues, we'll take them up at the time. Now, I recognise that this wasn't amongst the initial proposals when the draft budget came out, but members will have seen the significant deterioration in the budget picture over a period of months. I know many of us were quite excited when we saw that Welsh Government announcement of £160 million to be split between local government and the NHS. When it turned out that actually only 20 million was going to local government, I felt a bit disappointed. But I was even more disappointed when I found out that of that 20 million, as it was divided between 22 councils, we only got just over £250,000 of that. So members will have seen the pressures we've had on our budget, and unfortunately, that's pushed us into making some very difficult decisions, I'm afraid. But thank you for those constructive questions.
Thank you, Councillor John. Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Grocott? So if we can now move on to other questions, and I know that Councillor Watkins has a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's to follow on in part from the breakfast clubs, before school clubs, sorry. I've got a concern because in particular, we've also got an increase in school meals happening at the same time. More than a 10 pence increase, it's actually now a 35 pence increase. You add that together with the charge for breakfast clubs, and my concerns are the families who are just managing. I accept that free school meals, children are being accommodated, and I'm very appreciative of that. It's those families who are going to now have an increase in their council tax, £27 increase a month in terms of if they add on the breakfast clubs plus the increase. You have several children. It's the children who are going to miss out. The children are going to be the ones who are taken out of these hot lunches, which are by far the best nutritionally for them in the middle of the school day. Families are going to have to make these difficult decisions, and they are going to struggle. So I do really have a question as to whether these things in combination to a family is actually going to be the most straightforward way forwards. And actually, is there anything we can do to mitigate some of those pressures? I appreciate you said that you will review it, and I do really ask that you do review it carefully. I also have to ask about the administration of these charges for the school clubs, because if I think about the school that my children attend, it's not an hour. It starts at 8:15 and they're taken down to the playground at 10 to 9, so it's 35 minutes. They don't have any spare members of staff in the club at the moment to stand and administrate which children are arriving when. It says in the documentation that it's going to be paid through parent pay, so that's then going to be added into the school administrators' tasks to do that. I'm wondering, are we generating up an administrative task for a very small amount of money, for a very small amount of time? I actually am not really convinced this is going to prove to be a real saving for this council or a real extra revenue. So I'd really like you to have a careful look at that if possible.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. 2 questions there for you, Councillor John.
Thank you. Well, we will certainly look at it as it's implemented, and if, as I say, if there are families that are being unfairly penalised, then we don't want that to be the case. So we're very happy to look at how that develops. You're right to say it'll be administered by parent pay. We will work with the schools very closely, and if administration is too onerous, then we will work with the schools to see how we can help mitigate that. Obviously, there is a role for schools already in administering free school lunches. In terms of the charges, we've only had 2 price rises in school lunches in the past 7 years. So I suppose had we maintained those charges with the rate of inflation, then perhaps you wouldn't be looking at a 35p rise. We would have managed it over the 7-year period. So it probably appears a much bigger rise than it would ordinarily have been. At the moment, in terms of the 22 local authorities, we're bottom of the table in terms of what we charge for for school lunches. With this price rise, it certainly doesn't make us the highest charging authority. We're not even in the top 5, but it does move us up from the bottom of the table to the top half of the table. So, as I say, that does represent a challenge, and we appreciate that this will have an effect on families, and we will watch very closely and see how these charges, together with the free school, together with the before school clubs, bed in. And as I say, if there are issues there, we will do what we can to intervene, because we want these to be implemented in as fair a way as possible. And as the chair of the CYP committee mentioned earlier, Councillor Grocott, if there are ways in which we can increase the number of children who get free school lunches because they're eligible, but perhaps their families don't realise they're eligible, then that may help mitigate that as well. But if there are ways in which we can identify at-risk groups, we've got a cabinet member for social justice. We've made it very clear that as an administration, we're committed to delivering social justice. If there are other ways in which we can identify at-risk groups, we're more than happy to look at that. So at the moment, I think eligibility for free school meals is one of the main ways in which you define poverty. But if any members have any views on other ways in which we can identify at-risk groups, we're very happy to look at that.
Thank you very much for that response. Councillor Watkins, did you want to come back at all? Thank you very much. And I think we have a question next to do with school transport from Councillor Howarth.
Thank you, Chair. And I was unsure whether this came under your remit or came under Roger Hoggins's portfolio, but I'll ask the question, and between you, you may be able to answer. I do note that we have 309k savings made in transport and fleet savings, but my main question is on the transport that we do provide for children within Monmouthshire who attend schools outside of Monmouthshire. And I do know there are Welsh Government guidelines into the rules and regulations of that. What I want to know is the savings, have we made any savings as reference to transporting children out of catchment area for them schools? And do they actually pay for that transport? Is it subsidised by this council? Because at the end of the day, I'll give you one example. In Abergavenny, we transport children to Crickhowell High School. No problem for me whatsoever. But if that's subsidised by this council to transport children from Abergavenny when there's a totally adequate school there in Abergavenny for them, the ratepayers of Monmouthshire are subsidising for children to go where they feel they like to go. Now, in my area, I have 3 schools. I have Brynmawr, Crickhowell and King Henry. And I know the children who live in Clydach or Llanelli Hill who want to go to Crickhowell School have to pay for that. Quite a large sum of money as well. So I'd like to know, are we being fair with this, and is there any savings to be made there within the PTU and with the education side? It has been a bugbear of this council for many years now, how much it does cost us to ship children around the county for schools, especially with our rural side of it, and whether we actually are carrying this out to our best. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. If you'd like to come back.
Thank you. Well, this is not actually my portfolio. This comes under Brian Jones's portfolio, but I'll try and answer it for you as best I can. And if we need Brian to perhaps send you an email at a later date, we can do that. But as I understand it, so we provide free transport to the nearest school. So in some instances, a student's nearest school will be out of county, and we'll provide free transport in that instance. If a parent chooses to send their child out of county, but there is space in the local school, then they won't get free transport there, so to Crickhowell or wherever it might be. If there's no space in the local school and they send their child to their next nearest school, which happens to be out of county, then they would get free transport there. There also may be some extenuating circumstances why a child may not go to their nearest school. So, like you, I remain concerned about the number of students we lose out of county, not just in the Abergavenny area. We know it's an issue in the south of the county, near Usk, but also in the Chepstow area as well. So that is something we're looking to address, and we're working with schools to do that. A lot of that is about driving up standards. So we're competing with the very best schools in South East Wales. It's also about looking at catchment areas, and that's why we're going to be doing a catchment review later this year, because I think there are some areas where the catchment areas are not quite right and they don't fit very neatly. So that's something we're looking at. In terms of the broader question, there may be other areas where we could provide savings in terms of home to school transport. I mean, we do provide free transport above and beyond what is statutory, but that's a choice that we make, that we feel that there is a role for us in providing that public service to students and helping them get to school, particularly in what is a very rural area. But the point you highlight, it is a concern, and it's something we want to address in the coming months and years.
Thank you very much. Roger, would you like to come in on?
The only thing I might add to that Madam Chairman, is we provide free transport to nearest or catchment school, and that irrespective of boundaries. So it may be that the nearest school is across a boundary, but that is the basis. That's the basis upon which the current policy works. As Councillor John has pointed out, there are other circumstances where there's space is not available, or there may be extenuating circumstances in some instances where we do provide transport free. But the majority, the vast majority, is through that basis, nearest or catchment.
Would you like to come back, Councillor Howarth?
I'm just really want to know, are we subsidising that for families who travel out of catchment? And that's my main point is to run a bus for, let's say, 36 weeks a year has to be cost neutral if the school is not full and they're wanting to go out of the area. That's whether it's £10 a trip or £5, it has to be cost neutral because they should go to their local school, which is nearest to them. If not, they have to go by means. We supply transport. People in my area have to pay quite a considerable amount of money, but other areas seem to have it a little bit different. It's just my point I'm making. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger, if you'd like to come back.
Purely for clarity, Madam Chairman, in the event of a student electing to go to a school other than nearest or catchment, we would provide concessionary transport if there is transport available on an existing service. So if there are seats available, we would allow that student to travel on that service, but there is a charge, and that is actually included within one of the mandates as well.
Thank you. Councillor Grocott.
I know this is potentially a minefield because of parental rights to choose a school for their child and so on, but I think we're hearing some quite weak answers here to questions. And it's not just the possibility of subsidising families with this transport policy, it's also subsidising other local authorities. Because for every child that we lose from Monmouthshire, particularly in my part of the world, to Powys, then those children will be taking the age-rated pupil unit with them. And so Crickhowell or some of the village primary schools around there will be benefiting from Monmouthshire's loss. I think when you look at the hard facts about whether there is place in schools in the Abergavenny cluster, King Henry has reduced its pupil numbers from its peak by around 50%. And when you look at the numbers coming through from the primary schools that feed King Henry over the last decade or so, that number has reduced by about 50%. We are therefore not talking about schools by and large under pressure of places. Far from it, we're looking about trying to maintain a situation where the number of pupils is often in decline. And that then has repercussions in terms of the education budget for this authority and for individual schools. I do take the point that has been made that there may be extenuating circumstances, and very often that might be around special educational needs and the provision of a specialist unit in a school. I can think of special schools, for example, that Monmouthshire children go to that are not in this authority. But going back to a previous existence of mine, I can remember tremendous parental pressure for trying to get children into schools that were considered to be good schools according to the perception of those parents. Schools that might, for example, offer some sort of dyslexia provision. At the same time that the authority had set up its own provision. And I would want to see guarantees from whichever cabinet member is responsible, that wherever possible, we do not provide transport for Monmouthshire children to go out of county thereby depriving the schools of Monmouthshire from money that they would get coming in.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. So your question really is that you want to know what we're doing to keep children in our county and to maintain the levels of pupils in the schools. Can I ask Councillor John to respond to those points?
Okay, well, again, this is outside my portfolio, and I guess we're getting away from the budget debate here, but this is something we're aware of, that we're losing students out of county. We have statutory commitments in terms of what we have to deliver in terms of free transport, and we are meeting those commitments. As I say, we'll be looking over the coming months and years as to how we keep more of our students in our county, and you will have seen in the corporate plan we approved recently, that's one of our key commitments that we're looking to deliver in the lifetime of this term.
Thank you. If I can take comments, first of all from Councillor Powell and then from Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just I wanted to correct something that Councillor Grocott said. The numbers intake in September in King Henry are up on previous years, not down.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Fox.
As a past Cabinet Member for Education, I just wanted to support what Richard said, because, you know, parental choice is a difficult thing to manipulate. You can't really. You can do your school organisation to actually offer parental preference. To give parental choice drives a huge amount of surplus places, and you know we're charged with removing surplus places by Wales government. But you can't stop parents choosing from where they actually want to send their schools. And I think what Richard has said is absolutely right. Driving up standards to make sure our own schools are more desirable, if that is the issue, that must happen. A catchment review also has to do things. The catchment review is desperately needed in Monmouthshire. We have children in certain schools feed into the wrong comprehensive school because of historical decisions made by politicians many years ago. And those things have to be addressed. That would have, in the case I'm thinking of, a direct impact on King Henry's intake. But we cannot stop parents choosing to go to Crickhowell or Bryn Mawr. And as Roger has shared, there is a concessionary scheme where people pay if they express that parental preference, which they are at law legally allowed to do. We cannot stop them doing. What we're saying is, okay, we have a spare seat, you can ride on it, but you will have to pay for that. So I don't see how we're cross-subsidising, unless there's a very special case where there's a special need for an individual to be going out to a certain school because of a certain speciality which we have to provide. You know, that's that extenuating circumstance. So I think Richard's, the council's, the administration's direction of moving, driving up standards, catchment review, all things which can encourage more people to stay locally, that is great. But you cannot get in the way of parental preference.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fox. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. I find it encouraging that our aim is to keep people in county as much as possible, and that secondary education review, catchment area review, is absolutely needed. And I'm all for that. It's encouraging to hear the leader say that there are extenuating circumstances when it comes to parental choice, and if that parental choice is driven by a child's welfare, then I like the fact that we are providing transport, but I do not agree that we are charging those people for it. When there are circumstances that are driving the parents to make those choices, maybe it's because of a split family, and that is just how practically it works, be it bullying or disability or something like that. I think in those circumstances that there should be some money provided to help subsidise, at very least, or pay for that transport, even though it's not a natural choice, or if there's a space in that school, in county or out of county. Would you agree with that?
I think Councillor Jones makes a really important point. There will be circumstances, and it's for us as politicians to set the structures, the guidelines, the regulations, but we can't presume that we know anyone's child better than their own parents. Parents know what's best for their own children, and I think it's really important that parental choice is protected, that parents have the right to choose because they know what is best for their own child. So we'll put the structures in place, but ultimately, I think parental preference is really important in the admission system, and that's something I'm really keen to defend.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Jones, for your question. Councillor Dovey.
Gone dead on me, Borough Ellens. Thank you. It's the question of parental choice I'm very interested in, especially with regard to Chepstow School, obviously. Parental choice has been one of the issues with regard to Chepstow School, and the old boundaries, if you like, have been eroded over the years, with Monmouth School taking more and more from the Wye Valley area, if you will, and which has meant that the school has been competing in a very difficult situation. That is more difficult now, because we have two schools of our own which are going to be either side of Chepstow School. One is Monmouth School, one is Caldecott School, and they are going to be 21st century schools. And you are talking about parents exercising their choice. Now, most parents will look at their choice there, and they will, I suggest, be very tempted to send their children to either of those schools, because they are what they are and what we laud them up to be. How are we going to handle the issues that are going to come about for Chepstow School? Because I don't think we're going to get to 21st century status for best part of 10 years. I suspect I won't be on this planet by that time.
Councillor Dovey,
so
can
that's the question I want to ask. How do we handle that situation?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Dovey. I mean, we have been told that there is going to be a review of catchment, and I think we're primarily here today to address questions concerning the budget. But if you want to come back very briefly on that point.
Yeah, I think we are digressing a lot from these budget proposals, but what I will say is you're right. There are issues, particularly along the Wye Valley, the Landogo, Tinton area. Does that fit more naturally into the catchment area of Chepstow or Monmouth? I think there's a discussion to be had there. But I think I'll reiterate what I said earlier. Parental choice is really important, and I'm not going to interfere in the right of parents to express preference as to which school their child should go to. But that said, we do need to work with Chepstow School to raise standards. We know there are some recommendations that came out of their Estin inspection in the autumn. We're working with the school to drive up standards there and address and implement those recommendations. But there's also an issue about the 21st century investment that we've made in Caldecott and that we're making in Monmouth. And as you know, we're committed to rebuilding Abergavenny and Chepstow in due course. But we've recognised in this budget that there are particular challenges for those two secondary schools in the county, which are not brand new at the moment. So as part of the rebuild in Caldecott and Monmouth, we've invested a significant amount of money in new technology. So that's why, as part of this budget, we're putting £200,000 in IT investment into King Henry and Abergavenny, and the same amount into Chepstow. So that's a significant investment in IT, which we all recognise is really important to the ability of teachers to deliver the curriculum. Of the ability to be literate in IT is vital in an increasingly competitive jobs market. So I hope that money will be spent wisely by Chepstow School, and I'm confident that will make a real difference to the attraction that school represents for parents.
Thank you. I'm very conscious that you've got to go shortly. I think there's a question from Councillor Pavia next.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on, there is an element of obviously parental choice in this, but in terms of preparing ourselves for the ALN legislation that's coming through. I can see there's obviously been a slight tweak because of the delay in implementation back to 2020. Just in terms of the, and this may have been covered in committee, so apologies, to understand the costings for the review, is that to understand demand and potential future cost pressures, and the other element of that is the overspend on high cost placements. Is it that we're sending more of our pupils outside of county because we haven't got enough space in county, or is it because of those particular places? Because I know there's, we're looking at potential a new model for specialist learning in Monmouthshire, but I'm just trying to understand, particularly from a Chepstow perspective, a Mountain House School, is there more pupils in there out of county that's pushing our pupils elsewhere? It's just trying to understand that picture in my mind. Thank you.
So at next week's Cabinet, we'll be announcing the consultation into our ALN review, which will run until the autumn, and we'll be looking to implement that in the next financial year, so not in 18-19. So from this budget, you won't see a direct impact of the implementation of that ALN review on the budget we're looking at today. But you will have seen from Councillor Murphy's slides that there are some savings we're expecting to make in the forthcoming financial year from some high-cost placements ending, and we're not having new placements to take up that cost. So that's where we're getting some changes. But I will be saying a lot more about that north-south ALN model that we're looking to implement at Cabinet next week.
Thank you, Councillor John. Are you happy? Did you want to come back at all? Councillor Becker, I think this will have to be the last question.
Yep. Always good to end on one of mine. Chepstow School, the 400k that's going to be split between them and King Henry VIII. Can you tell us roughly how that's going to be split? The sort of proportion that might do. Also, have we really thought that that's actually the best use of money to Chepstow School? The boys' toilets mostly shut through a mixture of their inappropriate use by some of the children. I would have thought fixing their toilets would be a better thing to do than giving them a shiny new toy. But
okay, well, this certainly isn't about buying toys for schools. This is a £400,000 capital investment, which will be split exactly 50-50 between King Henry and Chepstow School. So it'll be £200,000 for Chepstow School, for them to invest in IT as they see fit. No, it's not for us to micromanage schools and tell them exactly what they've got to spend it on. £200,000 for them to invest in IT facilities, equipment, things that might help teachers deliver their curriculum. It's for the school to decide how best that money is spent. But the point about the toilets, nobody's raised any concerns with me about the state of Chepstow toilets. I visited the school a few weeks ago, but we're happy to look into that. If there are issues with toilets, then yes, they should be addressed. But this is a serious investment in IT, and I'm confident that that'll make a difference to young people. But I will look into that issue about the toilets that you raise, and I'll send you an email about it.
Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Becker?
Only quickly to say that I consider all computers toys because I love them. But no, and I'll look forward to engaging with you on that. The actual opinion of that actually comes from the students of the school, so regarding the toilets. So I'll take it up with you outside of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed, Councillor John, for coming along and answering questions today. And we're now going to move on to the adults portfolio. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Tony Crowhurst to the meeting today. If I can just give you a bit of background, Mr. Crowhurst, this meeting is quite unusual insofar not many councils have the opportunity, like we're having today, to question the Cabinet members about the budget. And it's very unusual, obviously, to have a public forum on this sort of meeting, but I have asked members, and they are very happy for you to have the opportunity to address them this morning. I also understand that I've had a letter from you personally, and I have responded, and I very much look forward to setting up a meeting with you concerning, my responsibilities as Stronger Communities Chair. And I know that the leader of the council, Councillor Fox, has also indicated that he will be responding as well. But if you would like to address the meeting, thank you.
First, I'd like to apologise for my lateness in arriving. I've had to take my daughter, my disabled daughter, to Cardiff this morning. So the Cardiff traffic, the Bringlass tunnels and the gas main in the High Street have all contributed to my lateness. I'd also like to thank you for allowing me to come along here today to address you. A lot of you will have received a random series of emails from me and letters, and I hope that I'll be able to put some context to them. I understand that this meeting is primarily concerned with budgetary issues, and indeed that is where our first concerns. I'm speaking here on behalf of the disabled group called CARE, which is run by Jenny Barnes, which most of you will probably be aware of. Although the initial concerns arose as a result of the budget presentation we had at the Access for All meeting about 6 weeks ago, as I furthered my investigations into the various documents that you've produced, I had cause to use the word endemic at one point when I was considering the council's approach to the needs of disabled and elderly people and their carers. The documents that you produce are of varying natures. Kelly Byrne, for instance, has produced an excellent document which relates to the Equalities Act, where she has gone through each and every one of the 9 protected characteristics and considered their input to the Future Generations Bill. However, in your corporate business plan, you mention the need for equalities, you mention the protected characteristics, and you name 4. If I were a member of the LGBT community, I would question why they didn't get a mention. And of the 4 that you mentioned, 1 doesn't exist. So I would say that on the one hand, you are showing an excellent image, and on the other, in a corporate document which is on your website, you're letting yourself down considerably by quoting gender as a protected characteristic, when the 2 related to issues about gender are sex and gender reassignment. But gender itself is not a protected characteristic. So that's one aspect of what I've discovered. In the middle of December, we were asked to consider your active transport proposals. The active transport legislation requires pedestrians and cyclists to have clear routes, and the Welsh Government have asked you to prepare plans showing these. When we came to look at the plans, I attended a meeting at Court Blethen, and there were 14 of us there. And when I looked at the attendance register, I found that 8 of those people were employees of the County Council. Now, I know you're supposed to do consultations, but this didn't feel as though you were perhaps consulting as widely as you could do. On the day, it was very hard for us to make a judgment. So subsequently, we took the plans away and we considered your proposals. We produced reports on each of the 7 conurbations, and again, we felt that the needs of disabled people were not being considered. There were areas where I took a lady in a wheelchair around the streets of Usk 2 years ago, and we had great trouble. She wrote an executive summary to the report we produced, which said that she would not like to come back to Usk again. There are issues such as the narrowness of the pavements, the fact that pavements which were originally accessible turned out not to be, simply because people had put A-frames on there for advertising purposes, or plant pots, or they were projecting bay windows. But the point was that no equality impact assessment had been made, or appeared to have been made, on the proposals that you were putting towards the Welsh Government. We have contributed our comments to Capita, who you've employed to further that particular activity. And so the question of equality impact assessments didn't seem to have been addressed in that instance. And then I happened to come across your Mon Life business plan, which came to you sometime in January and was page 300 and something of a really fat document. And I went through there, and again, you didn't appear to have even considered, even though I know it's an overarching document, one that is there to provide a basis for subsequent actions by the council, but you let yourself down there. There is a paragraph there which talks about equality. In that paragraph, you mention the DDA and say that all the actions and activities that are carried out will be compliant with DDA. And anybody who has had access to disability legislation over the years knows full well that you cannot comply to DDA. There is nothing in DDA legislation that says that an accessible toilet should be 2.2 by 1.5 metres. There's nothing that says that the gradient of a slope should be 1 in 12. It is an overarching legislation which is supposed to enable people to understand that disabled people have rights. But DDA 95, in 2010, the Equalities Act assumed all the responsibilities of DDA 95. That was 8 years ago. And yet your document which you were producing there and which came up before you all to be approved let you down because you were referring to out-of-date legislation and you hadn't done an impact assessment on it. And so I come back to the financial aspects to which originally attracted me to this. We came to the Access for All meeting and we were presented as one of the presentations that day were the budget considerations for 2018-19. And within that document was a statement that adult disability services were going to be reduced by £638,000. Now, we asked at the time, there was a lady sitting in this corner and I was sitting over there. And at the time, we questioned what this meant. So Peter went out and got a lady from social services, I assume, who came here and effectively said to us, it's all right, it's all part of the budget, or something of those nature. But the point is that the audience that were being addressed there wanted to know the operational details about where the 638,000 was going to come from. What we had back was strategy and of no immediate use to the people sitting in wheelchairs in the front row here. So on that one hand, you weren't really addressing the audience. You weren't thinking about the needs of the people here who wanted to know whether they were going to lose this, that or the other. So I pursued the question of where the 638,000 was supposed to be coming from. And I found that this was proving difficult. So I asked a question. And the question was, can you tell me how much the budget for disabled disability services, disabled adult services, has decreased over the last 5 years? And then put some flesh on that and tell us what services have been taken away from the disabled people as a result of these budget reductions. Now, although the 9 protected characteristics, do not include them, the 2 subjects that you hear most of when you turn on the 10 o'clock news at night is dementia and carers. Now, dementia is inherently one of the characteristics because it's part of the mental impairment area. But carers are not specifically mentioned there. Care in the community we hear a great deal about, but there's no specific mention of those. Now, the needs of carers and disabled people generally is increasing. People with dementia we know are increasing. So on the one hand, we saw a budget which was decreasing. We knew that inflation was going up by, say, 3%. We knew that the number of people that were needing your services, your help, was going up, and yet your budget was going down. So wasn't it right that we asked the question of you, where's this money coming from? Now, yesterday, I received a comprehensive response from Peter. This has taken some little time to be produced, but it's there. We like to be transparent at CARE, so we've produced a briefing paper, which we're sending round to other groups, telling them both the history of the last 6 weeks and also the response of the council, so they can read the 2 together and get an understanding of where this is happening here. I'd just like to make an advert for 1 second, picking up on some of the things that have been said just a little bit earlier, and your concern about low-income people, people in poverty in your county. Yesterday, and this is the reason I haven't fully considered Peter's response yet, yesterday I spent all day preparing a big lottery bid. The subject of the big lottery bid are parents who are in poverty but have work, and we can help. We can try and help in this area, and it's relevant to the actions that you were talking about earlier, and we would like very much to work with your council to try and identify the people who could benefit in your county if we're lucky enough to get this money. But the key thing that came out of Peter's report was that the 638,000 was wrong. It should only have been 200,000. Now, or thereabouts. Now, it's your roadshow, which has been saying your budget changes over for next year, have been on the road for quite a while. I think the Access for All group was perhaps one of the last to hear the figures, and nobody knew that this was wrong. You actually brought in a lady from Social Services to defend a cut of £638,000, and it was wrong. So one aspect of Peter's reply has been a definition of the budgets over the last few years for, I believe it's for Social Services, although you don't have that department now. But then he's taken out of that the reductions for adult disability services. The total reduction over the last 5 years for Social Services is in the order of £2 million, and about £638,000 have been reduced, have been taken out of disabled adult services. Now these are big numbers, and we would still like to know what has been lost by disabled people. It may be in Peter's report, but yesterday I had other things to do. I was trying to produce this lottery bid. So what's my question? I suppose my question is, can you convince me that on each activity and in each proposal that comes before your council, you adequately consider the needs of disabled and older people and the carers? Can you convince me that although through efficiencies of the organisation, the savings which have accrued over the years not only maintain the same quality of service that the disabled people came to rely on from your council, but also that you can accommodate the increasing needs of a complex group, the numbers of which are increasing? I think that's about all I can say at this moment, but thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Crowhurst, for coming along today and making a very valuable contribution to our meeting. I mean, I've identified sort of 5 broad areas of your questions, and obviously there's one general question at the end. So I think if we take those broad areas and I ask relevant people to respond, would you be happy with that? So if we look back at the first question, and obviously come in if you think I've misinterpreted what you said, and that was a question concerning gender and sex and gender reassignment, and you mentioned Kelly there. So I don't know whether Claire and Kelly would like to deal with that specific comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was a general point about how we respond to the protected characteristics, and there is a process to give Mr. Crowhurst some reassurance. This is a piece of work that we do up front when we're actually formulating proposals. But I suppose we would only note an impact on a protected characteristic if we felt there was an impact. And I think in the case referred to, I think it was the report that we did around the ADM and the corporate plan, we only set out and identified the areas where we felt there was an impact. And I have to say, there was quite a lot of work that went into that. It went to several meetings. There was a lot of discussion about it. So, you know, I think we did the groundwork. I think it was as comprehensive as we could possibly make it. But, you know, we're always willing to learn. And I think if there's more to be done, so for example, in the case of the Mon Life business plan, the business plan that's been put in front of council to date is a draft. It's an initial draft. It's an early document. The overarching business case is the important document. What we will now bring back to council through a management agreement is a revised business plan, which will obviously have regard to those wider issues and characteristics that Mr. Crowhurst has referenced. So, for example, in leisure, tourism, culture, I suppose, being in spirit, keeping in the spirit of the DDA, exercise referral schemes, the work we do with young people, with carers, with looked after children. That's at the heart of everything we do. And of course, we'd make sure that we thoughtfully and carefully reflect all of that. It's central to our, not just our business model, but our mindset and way of being, I'd like to think.
Thank you. Would you like to come back?
One point there. For the last 16 or so years, I've been on the boards of housing associations. Originally with Mellin, and I'm now on the board of Monmouthshire Housing. On each of the reports that comes to us, we have an issue which is called equality and diversity. Every single item that comes to us, in both those two organisations, we have this item of equality and diversity. And a clause has to be put in there about the relevance of the particular thing we're talking about. Sometimes the officers get it wrong, and the board chastise them or say, well, sometimes they don't praise themselves enough. But nevertheless, it is an item which has to be on all reports. I would suggest that may be a route for yourselves, so that it is never forgotten.
Just to reflect on that, one of the things that we are implementing again as a refresher, and that's for all members and all officers, is enhanced training around the Equalities Act. We try and do it periodically. We're due to refresh that, and I know plans are afoot to do that. So I believe we have the frameworks in place. I believe we have the knowledge and understanding, but as I say, we're always willing to learn, and I think the plans that we put in place and the actions and activities will contribute further to that.
Thank you. Claire, did you want to add anything to what's already been said?
Not specifically to that question.
Okay, fine.
In terms of the other points.
Right, thank you. So I think that's probably dealt with two areas that you asked. If we can move on to the other question that was around active transport proposals, and you felt that there should have been better consultation, and that you particularly used the example of Usk, where you feel, so you'd like, your question really is about what processes the council go through to actually make somewhere. Yes.
We are not a negative organisation. We like to make positive suggestions. We've talked to Christian Smith, who is the officer who's looking after this, and he did make a suggestion to us. We suggested that there should be signage which clearly showed from the arrival points in the town, such as the car parks, the bus stops and all the rest of it, to the main points. There should be signs for people who use wheelchairs, people who use crutches, of the most opportune routes. When I took Tracy around the routes, we found that we were halfway up a road and we had to do a 3-point turn on a pavement. But simple signage would have meant that issue didn't go away. So we do try and make positive proposals, and something as simple as that we suggest might be helpful not only in Usk but also in Chepstow, where there are easy routes from the car parks into the centre of town, but they're impossible to find.
Thank you, and I'm pleased to hear that you are in contact with our officer. Roger, did you want to make a comment on aspects of active transport?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Crowe has mentioned about the obstructions in the highway. We did work extensively with various stakeholder groups around putting together that policy, and you have adopted a policy to try and manage that. So practically, we are trying to improve our access within the public environment, within the public highway, on our footpaths by doing so.
Could you speak into
Yeah,
the mic?
sorry, Madam Chairman, I wander off. So we have worked with them on that particular aspect of it. In relation to active travel, it's unfortunate that Mr. Crowe feels that the consultation wasn't sufficient. We did circulate quite widely using emails, social media, and various meetings to try and encourage people to contribute to that exercise. And yes, obviously, I think in all instances we could do better. But it's unfortunate if he feels that wasn't taking part, the opportunity wasn't there, albeit he was actually at the meeting where we actually practically worked on the maps to actually put down the routes. along with some members who also took that opportunity. So yes, we could do better. We've gone some way down that way. The only final point I'd make about active travel, and point which Ms Crowhurst made, was that we didn't include an EQIA. Actually, when it came to yourselves week before last, there is actually a future generations and equality assessment attached to that document. Perhaps it's our fault for not making it more obvious, but there is one there.
Thank you very much, Roger. Did you want to come back at all? No? And I think the other sort of questions were around the financial aspects, and that was around the figure of 638, which then turned out to be 200,000. So I want Councillor Murphy and Councillor Fox. Councillor Fox.
I think it's probably better for Claire to come in on that. That 638 was a more generic description. It wasn't specific to that matter. And I'm sorry if that gave the wrong impression. Mr. Crowhurst said it was wrong. No, it wasn't wrong. It was a generic term rather than a specific point. He's had the specific points now, but it's not right to say it was wrong.
Thank you for clarifying that. And Claire, did you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and apologies, my voice is a little croaky this morning. A couple of things to say, really. In terms of the 638, that's an overall saving against the adult social care budget, and it's linked to transformation of practice right across adult social care services. And in that sense, it's a continuation of the work which we've been taking forward in adult social care over at least the last 5 years in Monmouthshire. And that's based on understanding what matters to people, supporting people to live their own lives, and very frequently that will mean that they need less formal support and less of the traditional type of social care provision than formerly was the case. It's not an agenda around cutting services, and I know that Mr Crowhurst has had the information from the head of adult services about the range of disability services which we provide, which we commission as Monmouthshire County Council, including the all age disabilities team, the My Day, My Life support, which has taken a very traditional model of day service type provision into really working with people to have the most fantastic lives and the fantastic opportunities to do things which we want to do in our lives, and taking away those barriers to doing that. As part of that sort of approach, we've now got My Holidays in addition to the more traditional type respite offer which we continue to run through Budden Respite Service. We've also invested and have further investment from a regional fund called the Integrated Care Fund in something called My Mates, which supports people with disabilities to form friendships and relationships, and that's something which we're very proud of and is receiving more investment next year from a regional fund. In terms of the position around where do those specific savings come from, I think in looking at the adult social care budget, Mr Crowhurst will note and members will be aware that we are being supported in terms of additional pressures in adult social care, and in a sense those additional pressures more than offset the savings that we need to make, and that recognises the need to fund quality care, particularly around dementia, which is one of the areas which Mr Crowhurst has highlighted in his remarks, particularly recognising the importance of the care sector and the workforce within that sector, and the need to reflect national living wage standards within that sector. So there is a quite significant investment into adult social care, as well as those continued savings which are being achieved not through cutting services but through continuing to improve lives for people and reduce formal support where it's not needed. There's also within those savings and some of the sort of very detailed casework that we do is very close working with our health board colleagues and some people who formerly we would have supported as adult social services and been responsible for now access continuing care funding through the health board. So there's a mixture of things within that package, but all relate to getting the right support for people.
Thank you. And if I could Thank you very much, Claire. And if I could ask Councillor Fox to come in, and then if you would like to comment at the end. Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Chair. And Tony, can I thank you for coming along and taking the time to actually share your concerns and CARE's concerns more widely over the last few emails. And I know you wouldn't have done that lightly. I've known you a long time, and there's a lot of thought went into that, and concern and passion. And I understand that, so I thank you for raising that. And there are things we need to learn, and I think, as Kelly pointed out, the corporate plan. I take your point on that. Whilst we've highlighted the areas where we feel people might be affected, the admittance of not reflecting on the other areas gives the perception that we haven't considered them. And I think that's an important lesson. I take that back, and we need to reflect on perhaps how we can articulate better in our reports that we have considered all areas. I mean, in past, every report always was accompanied by an equality impact assessment, every decision. They still are, but they're captured in our wellbeing future generations assessment at the end. And I think you raising this now, I'm going to be a lot more thorough in looking at those myself, and just to make sure that reflection on equality is still strong as it needs to be, and our focus hasn't all gone on to the well-being expectations and measures. So I think we really do need to to look at that. And it's unfortunate. It seems that 638k was written down as adult disability services. That's caused a lot of confusion for a lot of people. Clearly that was almost a typo, I suppose. It should have been across adult services, as Claire shared, and then it would be very clear. And I think Peter's email to you, which I have up here now, is really helpful in breaking it down to all of us. To understand the percentage which have been levelled against adult disability services over the years. But from my perspective as leader, and us as the administration and the whole council, we are committed to working as best we can in ever tightening situation with those who are more disadvantaged, and which something we've always been passionate about is listening to the voices of the wider community who pick up not just disabled people but of disadvantage in many ways. And I valued the Access for All forum that has been operative for the last few years here and has been well supported, and we've taken a lot out of that. And indeed the work that CARE has done and Jenny has led on, it's been invaluable in lots of things. And I know Jenny and CARE get very frustrated when we don't always seem to be able to incorporate all elements into everything we do. But that's not to say we haven't listened and heard, and yet we are striving to make improvements. But we will never be perfect. We will always be challenged, and we will, there will always be room for improvement. But in the challenging times we've got, maintaining services and keeping them as strong and as robust and sustainable as possible is our priority. We've got to find ways of doing that in a massively shrinking resource. So sometimes when money comes out, it doesn't mean to say it's a reduction in service. It may be that we're just doing things, or will be doing things, in different ways going forward, and using the money perhaps more wisely with hindsight, I suppose. So, I've got no excuses. I think I thank you for raising the challenges. I think that was worth making, and thanks for coming along today to actually share that directly with us. I think that's helpful, and I know you wouldn't have done it lightly.
Thank you. I know two Cabinet members would like to come in next, and then obviously you're very welcome to respond at the end. Councillor Murphy and then Councillor Greenland.
Very briefly, Chair, just to remind people of the actual figures here that we're talking about here. The actual figures that are being bandied about, perhaps that's not the right term, were the original consultation figures. The 638 has now, and again this is across the directors, gone up to 925, but the investment in social care and health is 1,642,000. So the impression that some members might have is that all we're doing is taking money out of adult services and social care in general isn't actually right. There's been a substantial additional investment in that area, albeit, and Claire has explained what we're doing, and there are savings that have come out of the reprovisioning of some of those services.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Councillor Greenland.
Yes, just one point actually, which came out in Councillor Murphy's presentation earlier, and that is as far as disabilities facility grants are concerned. Last year, when we were considering the budget, there was a figure of £600,000 for the provision of improvements in people's homes with disabilities to help them to remain there as long as possible. And to be independent. Now, last year we looked at that figure and we recognised that we needed to make a one-off increase last year of £300,000, 50% increase in that budget. We did it. We looked at it again for this year, and we felt that we needed to do it again. So again, we have increased specifically for disability facility grants. We've increased that by another £300,000 this year.
Thank you very much. That's very good news and a very important point. Mr. Crowhurst, if you'd like to sum up at the end, thank you.
Just picking up on that one point there, one of the ways that you could help the future is by amending your planning rules so that the spec builders of this world, the Wimpys and the Taylor Woodrows and all the rest of them, included a great number more houses on their sites which were lifetime homes, and therefore in 50 years' time would be more accessible to the ageing community. At the moment, for instance, when Taylor Wimpey produce a two-bedroom house, it's 63 square metres. When a housing association produces a house, it's 68 square metres. So if you had some effect on your planning department to influence, I don't know how this happens because it doesn't happen anywhere else in the country, but there is a clear way where, without costing you anything, you could begin to impact on 50 years' time. That's when the future generations will become older, and you could make sure that the housing stock that is there in 50 years' time is considerably more attuned than it is now. We talked about disabled facility grants, Councillor Greenland, just now. Now, I don't know if you know the difference in cost between providing a stair lift on a straight flight staircase as opposed to one that's got winders in it, but it is considerable. So it's little things like that. It may not seem a lot to you, but if you're looking about 50 years' time, you're looking about a generation that's growing older, you've got to consider these things. The second thing I'd like to say, it goes back to cost. Last year, one of the increases to your social services budget was something in the region of 2.1 million, which was your commitment to the fair wages agenda. When you put that to the council, you also said that £434,000 needed to be spent in 1819 and 1920. Now, I don't know if that's been lost or whether that's being included in another expenditure or another pressure somewhere, but the point is that 2.1 million spent increasing the fair wages of the staff does nothing for the treatment of the disabled person who is receiving the support. So you may increase the budget and you may increase the amount that you give to the people providing the services, but does that necessarily increase the quality of life of disabled people? And the last point is that I understand that the Welsh Government have made some proposals regarding the amount by which councils would be allowed to reduce budgets relating to, I think, adult services and perhaps children. I'm not quite sure where this is because I haven't read up the Welsh Government's rules about these, but I understand that there is an edict coming from Cardiff Bay that says that we hope that you will not be able to reduce by more than 0.5% or something like that. I would like to think that that has been included in your calculations.
Well, thank you very much for those very valuable points that you've made today and for coming along to our meeting. And I know that I speak on every member here. We very much look forward to working closely with you, and some of the points you've raised there, is particularly about housing, need to be part of our local development plan. So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Crowhurst.
Thank you all.
Whilst we're on the subject of adults, does anybody else have any further questions around that portfolio? Councillor Howarth?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And following on from my comments earlier on, it's been explained now. I think we need to make sure, Chair, that that is amended for tomorrow's meeting and for Council as well, because that is a fundamental mistake within this report. I don't expect it from officers to put something in there, because that's what I picked up in my initial statement about never digesting that within the adult select. It's quite clear there. It says disability. It's quite clear. So can we make sure as officers we actually abbreviate that? Okay, I've got no further questions. Oh yes, sorry, one. The £200,000 Mr. Crowhurst made reference to the cut within the disability side. Is that to do with some documents that I noticed yesterday, reference to positions?
Who would like to?
I'm not sure what documents from yesterday, Councillor Howard.
On the planner yesterday, there's a couple of decisions to be made, and I didn't know whether they were budget cuts within the disability teams, etc. But there must be savings to be made there. It's on the planners yesterday. I had an email.
Okay, I'll check that out and let you know. But the savings that we're anticipating making from the disability budgets relate to what I talked about earlier, which is around practice change, making sure people live the lives they want to, and that they get the support from the right agencies.
Are you happy with that response, Councillor Howarth? So, if there's no further questions around the adults portfolio, we'll now move on to Councillor Jones' portfolio. And I know that although Councillor Jones isn't here today, so if I could bring in first Councillor Dovey, who's got a question around resources.
Yes, my question is around resources. Bearing in mind the workload that there is on operations with regard to our roads at the moment, particularly with the closures through the Wye Valley, for instance, and the extra workload being put on us with regard to meeting the requirements of the Assembly government with the new legislation that is coming out on widely on transport. Have we got the resource to be able, not only financial, have we got the resource to be able to commit to the extra workload we've got in the other areas, and the ones I'm talking about refer to the Transport Strategy Group, where that is developing a complete life of its own at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. Roger, would you like to come back on that?
I honestly don't like this microphone. As far as staffing is concerned, we will be looking at some reorganisation of staffing to meet the priorities within the department. It's a point well made. There is going to be demands in relation to active travel, the civil parking enforcement, and various projects. We do use a mixture of consultants and in-house staff, but I would hope to be bringing a report to members in the not too distant future to look at some refocusing of existing staffing arrangements to match where the priorities now lie. Sorry, they do change. They are moving. There are issues coming from Welsh Government. There are opportunities as well arise, and we do regularly bid into projects or into Welsh budgets to try and get money, Welsh Government budgets to try and get money. Obviously, if you're successful, you don't have to deliver it. So, but we will be looking at that, and I will be bringing something back to members in relation to that.
Thank you, Roger. Are you happy with that response, Councillor Dovey?
Yes, the need, I'm happy about the fact that the need is being identified, because now we have, as a county, to be involved in things that we never traditionally have been involved in, such as what we want out of the franchise for trains and what sort of contributions we're making there. So the issue for me is that we are calling on a lot of expertise, and a lot of that comes from, I have to say, outside. We've got a very good officer in Christian Schmidt, really talented young man, and I hope he stays with us for some time. But a lot of the other expertise we are drawing on actually comes from what I call our civvies, and they do that for nothing. Well, a couple of pints here and there helps on occasion out of office hours, if you like. But they do that for nothing, and that cannot go on. And the role of the strategy group within the services, whether they're bus, they're train, issues with regard to the road projects like the possible bypass in Chepstow, what we're working on. There is that sort of resource that we need as well. So it isn't just the pennies to do the thing we need. It is also the expertise and manpower, and looking ahead a bit to make sure we are equipped to be able to compete for assets, if you like, especially with the city deal coming up. We need to be on board with that, and there'll be work involved in that as well. So that is what I'm concerned about.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dovey. If I could now ask Councillor Brown to ask a question concerning waste.
Yes, I noticed that trawling through the pages of the budget that the sites in, I think, Usk and Mitchell, Troy were no longer going to be closed, but there is actually going to be a general change in terms of the hours for the opening of the disposal sites. And I just wondered whether consideration had been given to flexibility in relation to these changes in hours, because particularly on a weekend time, there do happen to be queues when people are trying to dispose of household rubbish, and I just wondered how much flexibility there was in terms of and I know there's a difference between the winter and the summer hours, and just would like for your comment on that. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, the figure's been put in there as a budget saving. It's worked on the basis of summer opening hours, winter opening hours. I do recognise the issue whereby they are busier on the weekends. No two ways about it, and certain times of the day are busier than others. We do, however, have to work with our contractor who provides the management and staffing on those sites to come up with those arrangements. However, if there is a permutation which works better, I would hope that members would be willing to consider that, if indeed the summer and winter hours you don't consider to be a best fit, as long as we can deliver the budget saving which you're looking at. So perhaps we could work with members to look at an option such as that to offer some level of flexibility within that.
Thank you very much for that response, Roger. Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Brown?
No, that's fine. I think the main thing I was really wanting to get across was the possibility of reviewing it depending on how it turned out in practice in terms of the change of hours. And I think the answer that I've got has effectively said that it can be reviewed. Is that correct? Presumably that's correct, is it?
It's within the budget, I believe, Madam Chairman. We have already spoken to the contractor. They have ideas on how it might be structured differently. So whilst the budget saving is in here, They operate on other sites, they see different permutations which might be suitable. We would have to work very quickly with yourselves to come up with an option, because this is a budget for 18-19. But if members wish to look at that, then I'd try and arrange that ASAP.
Thank you, Roger. Are you happy with that?
Yes, thanks.
Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just following on from Councillor Brown's questions about the amenity sites. I'll try this one. Following on from Councillor Brown's questions about the amenity sites, part of the mandates this year was to reduce the annual collections of green waste from November to March. Have you factored in the possible greater use of the CA sites over that period of time, the fact that we won't be collecting at the doorsteps? And would that be looked in the review as well? Because there may be a greater use in the winter, which you may not be expecting, but with a reduction in the brown bag collection, it might increase.
Thank you very much. There is that potential for more to come into the CA sites in terms of garden waste. What we know practically in those months when the vehicles are out on site, although the service is there, there's nothing hardly to be picked up. So yes, there may be some marginal increase at the sites, and we could take that into account if indeed we sit down with members and look at some detail. But the practice we see on site when we're operating is it drops right off. Garden waste drops right off December, January, February. So we don't see the impact as being that great back into the CA sites.
Are you happy with that? Certainly, if you came up to Llanelli Hill on Sunday when I tried to do some gardening, it was like being in Canada with a permafrost. Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question, really. I don't know if there is a facility at the moment at any of the sites for people to leave things when the sites are closed. Could this be something that could be considered in future if hours are shortened as they're going to be proposed?
Thank you, Councillor Woodhouse. Roger?
We can speak to our contractors about that. My first reaction would be to strongly not to do that at all, because it runs the risk of turning up on the morning and finding the gate completely blocked with stuff being dropped off there. That would be my concern if we create a facility which just allows people to turn up. There'd be no control over it whatsoever, and we could end up with as much in there as we're getting during the day. I exaggerate, but I think for effect you'd perhaps appreciate the point.
Thank you very much. Are there any other further questions? Councillor Smith.
It's not a question, Chairman, it's more a comment. For future budgets, I think we need to give a far, far higher importance to looking at the infrastructure, the highways budget and all these issues. When we went canvassing, these were the issues that were raised. The state of our roads, the dilapidation, and the reflection it has on the character of Monmouthshire. If something looks tatty, people think, yeah, I don't care about that. We must be incurring considerable insurance charges or costs with people who are having mishaps, punctures and such like. I don't know what the insurance claims are like. I was looking at some figures and I realised that my maths are up the wall. So that doesn't matter. But I really genuinely think we need to think seriously and hard now as a council. All our capital receipts at the moment are going towards a very positive and proper future. Education. Our children, that's our future. But to put all our capital asset into that one particular project, I think needs to be reappraised. We do need safe, functional buildings. This building going up at the back of these premises, it'll be a functional, safe building for the students of Coleg Gwent. So to future years, I would urge the Cabinet to give higher consideration to the highways budget, the infrastructure and all the other things. In my ward, there's a bridge that if it collapses, is going to cost 2-3 million to repair. That's your budget gone, Roger. So for future budgets, a different perspective, please. At a previous meeting, Councillor Greenland popped up with a figure of £2 million that we'd actually borrowed. Well, if you look back over a couple of years, I think it's more like 13 million that we have actually borrowed to sustain what we've got at the moment. As a council ourselves, we have repeatedly reduced and chiselled away at the budget. So Future years, Chairman, it's too late in the day to do anything now, but a serious think as to how we are allocating our funds.
Thank you very much for those comments. If I can bring in Councillor Fox, our leader.
Yeah, and thank you, Val, and I hear what you're saying, but I make no excuses for this council investing heavily in education since 2002. We invested probably 50, 60 million in primary schools. We're in the throes of investing 90 million in 2 secondary schools, and hopefully we'll be investing a similar amount in 2 further secondary schools. And I suppose there's only a period now and again in generations where we are charged with putting things right for future generations, and I think we're putting things right for education for many years ahead, and not many times will councillors have to preside over something so significant as we have, but I still think it is the right thing. There is a cost to that, as you're quite right. There is less money going into to roads. However, we've tried to manage that as well over previous years by using revenue funding to support capital borrowing to enhance our funding into roads. By 2 million a year we were servicing for, I don't know how many years we did that, 5 years I think, additional on top of the capital programme for road maintenance. However, it is an issue that people are quite rightly concerned about, but in the scale of the challenges we have at the moment, it is still, I believe, right and proper that we invest in our facilities for young people for the generations to come. We'll soon be, in the next few years, hopefully, we would have put all of our school stock really right. And we may be in a position there where we can look again at our capital programme and where we start focusing on next. Never, always mindful though that we have to maintain that stock of good buildings we put in place. But I think we just have a couple more years to go to make sure we achieve that task, which this whole council across all parties were signed up to from 2002 to improve our school stock. And I think we can be proud of what we've done in that regard.
Thank you very much. Yes, of course.
Never would I want to see a child underrated or their potential are underrated. But there are ways of doing things, and perhaps we can't have gold-plated all the time. So no way, it is absolutely right and proper that our youngsters have the best start that they can. And as I say, functional, safe, perhaps not the gold plating, but certainly I don't think we can wait those few years, because in those few years you have people who fall and trip and hurt themselves. They're a cost to us, they're a cost to the health service. It doesn't improve their quality of life. So there are all sorts of implications for having a not very good infrastructure at the moment. I absolutely support educating youngsters, and I'll declare an interest with my little brood as well.
Thank you. Councillor Fox, did you want to come back?
No, I know, Val, you've been with us on this journey with education. We've been together a long time in this place, and I know your commitment to education, delivering these good buildings and things. But I think what set aside our strategic review of education is that we added some additional value to the nature of the buildings, the learning environments we provided, so different to a traditional farm building clad on the sides, which you sadly see in too many authorities. What we tried to do is create an environment which enabled quality learning and excellent teaching. And I think the nature of what we've done maybe a tad more expensive at times. I accept that, and we you know, they haven't been cheap. But they are there to last. They are quality, and I don't think we're not. I wouldn't say they are been, what do you call them, gold plated at all. We've been very conscious of cost management, and officers have worked extremely hard to make sure we've created good value for money. Schools are built on a per foot cost, and we've always worked within those parameters. We just used it as well as we can.
Thank you. If I could take Councillor Howe's question next, and then Councillor Joe Watkins.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I welcome all the comments made by the leader and do support them fully. But I remember some months ago now, Councillor Williams mentioned the issue of grounds teams, the teams that we have who work extremely hard out there in winter, summer, whatever. I do welcome today that we have the savings which we were looking to be made of being reintroduced, the sweepers and all the grass cutting, etc. But Councillor Williams made a very valid point, which the council in its last term were very vocal on the cuts that we've made within our teams, Roger, your teams, going out there doing all the jobs. Where are we with the proposal that council looked from the question of the grounds teams? There's nothing in this mandate or in these mandates to look at how we're looking at perhaps introducing more apprenticeships for people to get out there and learn and do things. I see nothing in here how we can enhance keeping our county clean and tidy. We are in the middle here. We are just sitting there. It's going to tip the other way, I do surmise. The grants from Tidy Wales, I haven't seen anything there, whether we're going to have that again to go out there and do all them jobs, all the volunteers. Many hundreds of volunteers in Monmouthshire keep us tidy at the moment. How long that will last, I don't know. We're protecting our young people. Will them young people actually in the next 50 years want to go out and collect litter? Who knows? We don't know. But I'd like to know where we are with Councillor Williams' proposal to council. Are we looking at increasing our teams on the ground there to support Monmouthshire and keep it tidy and healthy and have a lovely place to live? We're hanging in there at the moment, and I surmise with the request that highways receive in drainage problems we have there, it's increasing all the time, and we're just not doing it. And value are right, the claims must be mounting up for us. It's a cost neutral here. We have to have a balance.
Thank you, Councillor Howarth. Councillor Fox, did you want to come back?
I'll probably look to Roger to supplement this, but if I recall, Kevin's motion to council a couple of councils ago was to spend £250,000 additional on staffing, I believe. Was it additional staff? I can't just remember. But obviously that motion was lost at that time. Not that we didn't have sympathy with what he was trying to do. It's just there wasn't a background of information behind that to help us make a considered decision. You know, in the face of a budget consultation, to throw in £250,000 without a depth of thought and understanding behind it would have been wrong. Roger, I don't know if you've got a deeper reflection on it, because I can't remember just the elements of what Kevin was proposing.
My recollection, Madam Chairman, of the motion was purely to introduce an additional £250,000 into the waste and grounds, no, not waste, highways and grounds budgets, and simply that to enhance those service areas, those being under pressure in relation to issues as straightforward. I believe gully emptying was mentioned, and certain service areas where we're raised as being under pressure.
Did you want to come back, Simon?
Councillor Williams ever put anything forward, reference to a better proposal, Roger, or we had not heard anything since? A budget mandate
Councillor
amendment?
Williams discussed with me permutations on how that money could be used, but I don't recall any piece of information actually coming forward, given a specific proposal. I stand to be corrected, but I don't remember it.
Only to, so, I mean, in fairness to Kevin brought a motion to this council for discussion. It duly lost. However, the sentiments were strong behind it, and that's where it closed from that perspective. That's not to say that hasn't, you know, that won't come forward in future budget rounds. You know, our opposition members have said many times, listen to us, and I think that's what we want to do, and Phil's constantly encourage people to bring things forward in a costed way that we can incorporate them into the budget process earlier. I think Kevin brought that forward a little late for us to be able to work it into the process and understand if it's the right thing to do as well. So you know, all credit to Kevin to bring that, but the motion was lost there. But we're mindful of his concerns in future budget rounds.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. And obviously it's difficult to discuss something when, unfortunately, Councillor Williams isn't here. So I think we will need to move on. Councillor Joe Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. I am a new councillor. This is my first budget, so I hope I'm hoping for some clarity. I've been looking at the anticipated capital pressures, and it follows on from what Councillor Smith was saying. And there is a rather scary figure of 80 million to bring the county highways to a level of safe road network. I understand that we've been putting all of our money into schools, and I completely commend that, and I would always support that. How are we going to plan for these sorts of large pressures that we will have coming up in the future? Because these numbers are clearly not going to go away. The roads don't mend themselves. So I'm hoping maybe some members of the Cabinet can elaborate a little bit on what our future plans will be to try and deal with some of these pressures.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Councillor Fox.
Yeah, it's always a frightening figure. When I joined the council, I was presented with a not dissimilar list. Every year we have to have this global position of if we had all the money, all the capacity in the world to do all of the jobs at the same time, this is what needs doing, and this is the amount of money you'd need to do it. Now the reality is, that we will never be in the position to do that. But I think it's a timely reminder. It's a reminder each year to help us recognise the pressures that are out there, so that we can make a conscious choice of how we prioritise our capital spend. We've made our prioritisation into education in the face of knowing some of those things as well, and but that reminds us that really to bring a perfect road structure up to absolute pristine condition, we need to spend 80 million on it. The reality is, if somebody gave us 80 million tomorrow, we couldn't do the work. I think Roger might want to reflect on that a bit more. But it also picks up things like, bridges. The money we need to spend on bridges. For instance, we've got a significant challenge we'll have it with a couple of bridges in Gilwern, for instance, and Chainbridge. They are significant capital pressures which are looming there that we will have to address at some point. That doesn't mean to say our priority shouldn't remain schools, but we need to be prepared as an administration. We might have some difficult choices to make at some point, and we have to pay due cognizance to that list of those priority areas. But I don't know why we always put it forward. All it does is tends to frighten us to death. But it is there, and it has to be.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Are you happy with that explanation? Councillor Webb.
I really do sympathise with you and the problems that you've had with your 465. I've also got huge problems with my 466, which must never be forgotten. It is a huge infrastructure. The road is really, really important to us. It's closed at the moment and will be closed again in October. I really, really feel that we, Roger, should get in touch with Welsh Government to see what their financial commitment is going to be towards this road, because in the end it'll probably have to be diverted, which is a huge cost, and I would like them to be aware of it. But I do sympathise with you, Chairman, with your particular road problem, which is huge compared with mine, which is also going to be quite big in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. And if you'd like to respond on that comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Councillor Webb has raised the problems in the Wye Valley with myself before. There are closures in there. There is one at the moment. There will be another one when the next set of lights come down. They've been there a long time, predominantly due to ecological studies and arrangements which we've had to put in place with that. So that has taken its time. We are taking the opportunity to do a full survey through the valley, the Monmouthshire aspect of it at least, whilst the closure is on, so as we can inform that debate better. I'm not clear at the moment through which budget we may seek to generate any funding from Welsh Government, but I will take that back to Welsh Government colleagues to see what route may be approached, perhaps more so down the tourism rather than the infrastructure as being an important priority for that route.
Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Webb? Councillor Duffy?
Just a very brief one. What Councillor Webb says about the A466 is absolutely correct, but it would be worthwhile just dwelling on the fact that we've got something significant happening in our area of South East Wales, which affects all the roads in that area, and that is the bridge tolls coming off and the huge increase in traffic in that area and the impact that is going to have on our roads in that area. So I would like, if a survey is being done on the 466, I would like it to be wider so that we have an idea of exactly what the coming impact of the bridge will be, and the growth in the number of planning applications and that sort of thing in the wider area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Whilst that's a very valid point, I think we are starting to move off what we really are here for, and we've still got Councillor Greenland and Councillor Jordan's portfolios. So I don't think there seems to be any burning questions around that portfolio. Has anybody got any other questions? And so if we can move on, which one should we take first? Should we take Councillor Jordan's, which is governance and staffing? So a very important area for the council. And did you want to say anything, or are you happy just to take questions, Councillor Jordan?
I'll take questions, Jane.
Right. Would anybody like to ask Councillor Jordan, who's been sitting very patiently there, any questions on his portfolio, which obviously is incredibly important, including the staffing of the council? Right, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One comment really, and a question about what the approach is going to be to deal with the problem, and that is staff absence. Because if you look at staff absence, the sickness in this authority, it is very, very high. If you look at the comparative data with other authorities, it doesn't stand very well. It's in the lower quartile. So it's a major issue, I think, for this authority to deal with. And obviously we need to look at our approach and see whether it needs to be modified. So perhaps the councillor could answer whether there's ongoing work on that basis. Thank you.
Yes, I'm aware of the issue with regard to staff sickness. I mean, we are running very, very lean in this authority, and I think officers are in fact looking at the situation now. If you look at the statistics within the business plans, we need to concentrate on those, and perhaps Kelly might have a word about that.
Yes, thanks very much. And I think you're right to point out in terms of the level of sickness absence. I mean, I guess members pre the current administration will be aware of the concerted efforts that we've made over the last 12 to 18 months in providing training through to our managers so that they can actually suitably manage sickness absence. And I guess from a couple of aspects, really. One is in terms of being on top of the patterns of sickness and the data. And we put a lot of investment and time into, I guess, the corporate centre, into our payroll teams to ensure that that data is being made available on a timely basis to managers. The other part of it clearly is being proactive rather than reactive to sickness as it manifests. Some of the positives that we're seeing at the moment is and I guess members will see this confirmed through some of our PI data. I'm touching wood and hoping going into outturn and through outturn that we will see an improvement in our sickness absence. The Q3 data that I had access to recently is confirming that fact. And obviously that will start to see us, moving in the right direction on the league table. But I'm still not satisfied. I think that's probably a feeling, felt by leadership team, by cabinet itself. We've got further efforts to make on this front.
Thank you. If I could also bring in Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And we're looking at this particularly through the Health and Safety Board as well. Most of our sickness comes either under stress or musculoskeletal injuries. One of problems regarding stress isn't necessarily just the stress that's caused by the fact that we've got that particularly lean workforce, although it clearly has an impact. But workplace stress can often be caused by domestic situations as well. So we're putting in training to managers to help them deal with and recognise external sources of stress that are impacting on the workplace. So there's an awful lot, as Peter said, there's an awful lot of work going on with regards to tackling the causes of absence.
Thank you. Councillor Davis, did you want to come back at all? Are you happy with those responses you've received?
Just to say, Madam Chairman, that I mean this is a problem in most organisations. It seems to be particularly acute in this one at the moment, I think. There are a number of different approaches, and I worked in an organisation which had perhaps a slightly robust approach to it, which did work actually in some circumstances. But we also have to be obviously aware that, you know, we are dealing with human beings here, and there are a variety of issues, I'm sure. But I think it's certainly in terms of the viability of this body that we really need to concentrate on, and we want those people back in work, even if perhaps they come back to work not doing what they were originally, you know, proposed to do, because there are all sorts of things that can be put in place to encourage people back to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Jordan? No. Are there any other questions to Councillor Jordan? No? Well, thank you very much, Councillor Jordan. And if we can move on to regeneration and Councillor Greenland's portfolio. So, do we have any questions for Councillor Greenland? Can I just ask one myself? The scare stories in the Abergavenny Chronicle. Can you just clarify for everybody what the situation is with the Borough Theatre?
Yes, Madam Chair. In fact, the trust that was set up in 2013 has agreed that it cannot continue with running the Borough Theatre, and therefore officers have been in discussion, and we have agreed that we will take control of the Borough Theatre directly as soon as that trust is wound up, which is likely to be in the next few weeks. In fact, tomorrow, Cabinet will be considering a report on the Borough Theatre and how we can take it forward. I believe that the Borough Theatre is an important asset for us, and I think that we need to find a long-term solution which will best fit that and take it forward into the future.
Thank you very much for that, and it's very reassuring for the residents of Abergavenny in that area, and I'm personally going to see Pirates of Penzance next week there, so thank you. Are there any other questions for Councillor Greenland? So we have still got another agenda item, and unless there's any other further questions, no further questions on the budget at all. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you. One of it was just about the reserves. So it said in the budget paperwork that our reserves are at an acceptable level at the moment, but in the next several years it will drop to 4.95 million. Sorry, I haven't got the paperwork in front of me. How does that compare against other authorities across Wales? Obviously, recently I've seen about one of the English authorities basically going bust. I just want to check that A, we're not in rough stakes of doing that. B, how are we in terms of our reserves in comparison to any other authorities?
Councillor Murphy.
I think Peter's going to give the detail on that, but I think Councillor Watkins was mixing up the earmarked reserves and the general reserve, but I'll leave it for Peter because he's got all the figures in front of him.
Councillor Fox, did you? Oh, Peter, sorry. Yeah, okay.
Yes, just to respond, I don't think your questions are one of specific detail. They're one of some comfort and reassurance with regards to the level of reserves. And I think, as Councillor Murphy has just confirmed, drawing a distinction here between our council fund, which is our general reserve, and making sure that that is at a basic level of adequacy. And the statement that I've made as part of the budget papers on the adequacy of reserves confirms that we are within thresholds on that. So that's providing the comfort that we're not in the situations that certain authorities currently in the press are in at the moment across the border. Suffice to say, however, with our earmark reserves, we are seeing a pattern of declining reserves, and we've adjusted our reserves policy accordingly to make sure that it is only absolutely and when necessary we are drawing on earmark reserves for one-off use. And clearly trying to look to afford ourselves the opportunity to replenish reserves over the medium term. Clearly that is difficult, and it has not been factored into the budget as stands here and now, but we await to see how our out-term position will work its way through and whether that opportunity is afforded to us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Fox.
Yeah, thank you. And our reserves are not high. We're on one of the authorities with lower levels of reserves, but that is quite understandable if you think, as Phil shared, that we're on 60-something% of the highest funded council in Wales. For many years we've had to do things in a different way, and I think we've been a very prudent council to manage and retain as much reserves as we have and provide and protect locally accessible services in the way we have. You can look around the annual accounts of councils. They're online. You can look at all of those and the movements in reserves. It's usually on about page 20 of those statements, and you'll see how some authorities across Wales have considerable reserves, yet they are funded considerably. And that's where we are frustrated about the imbalance of funding from Wales Government at the moment. The formula does it penalise in large authorities, rural authorities like ours, and we are constantly disadvantaged. And that's the same with other authorities like the bigger rural authorities. And the funding formula is wrong. Is broken. It needs to be doing something different, because it shouldn't be right that we're the lowest funded in Wales, and yet we still have those same expectations, indeed bigger pressures and bigger expectations being rural than many other authorities. Those other authorities have quite a lot more money than us, yet and manage to build up significant reserves. That's not a balanced playing field. I think it's not a political point here. The formula is wrong, and we need to come together to sort that formula out. And if there was a will in Wales Government, and we could all sit down together to alter that, and that big debate needs to happen soon, because the sustainability of authorities in Wales, as we are seeing in England, is at stake. In the longer term, how can authorities like ours maintain those high quality services with a shrinking resource base? There is only so much we can do. And so as much as people often raise, well, wish we weren't doing that, or we wish we weren't making that saving, perhaps that gives some context to why we have to.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fox. Councillor Pavia.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on that, and this probably is directed either to Councillor Fox or Councillor Murphy, and understanding the formula funding pressures going forward, what do you believe to be the ceiling of council tax level to be over the next few years? We've talked about the squeeze middle, another 4.95% plus additional precepts of, town and community councils and police. Where are we seeing the ceiling of what is acceptable?
It's a good point, Paul. I think this is one of those dilemmas that all councils are going to be wrestling with going forward. It hurts me drastically to make a recommendation of a 4.95% council tax increase for this council. It really does, because none of us want to level more and more charge on the residents we serve. Indeed, we tried in this council to freeze council tax for a couple of years. That's had actually not a good effect on this council because it eroded the base funding, which we're now having to rebuild, if you like. There is always been sort of it was a spoken cap, but now more of an unspoken cap of 5% on council tax increases. I think this year you're going to see across Wales many councils at a similar level to us, a couple below, some significantly more. Pembrokeshire you're going to see probably at 12.5% to 13% council tax increases. Flintshire at 6.7% increases. Several councils moving over 5% increases. And unless there's a significant change in mindset, I expect you're going to see significant council tax increases for the next couple of years. I can't see how we can get away with it. The only way, that's where we have a choice as elected members. We can decide to start reducing the level of council tax, but reducing services to match. And I don't think any of us want that. And so that's the dilemma. How do you maintain locally accessible services, high quality, sustainable services with a shrinking resource? It's a massive challenge for us. And I know people think that council tax is just, you do it every year just to close that gap. We have huge amounts of discussions for many, many months until we get down to the smaller areas. And the final decision is quite right and proper that we have to make is the council tax decision, because that's the bit which closes the puzzle. But I don't know what the answer is, Paul, going forward. But it's just going to it's going to be more and more challenging. Or we've got to alter the nature of what we deliver in local authority. We've got to accept that it's going to have to be different. If council tax is going to feature quite heavily.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fox. Did you want to come back at all? Are there any further questions to any of the Cabinet members? If not, then we'll move on to our last agenda item. And I think members have had these papers since the 20th of February. So if you'd like to give a brief overview, Claire.
Yeah, a very brief overview, because my voice won't hold out, and I realise it's been a very long meeting. The purpose of bringing the paper forward today is that under statute part 9 of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, there is a legal requirement on a regional basis for local authorities within regional footprints, health and social care, regional footprints, which are the health board footprints, to pool commissioning budgets for care homes across the region and with health boards. Now, across our region, that work has been taken forward by the Regional Partnership Board, which is also on a statutory basis under Part 9 of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and Councillor Penny Jones is our member of that board as Cabinet member. And the purpose of bringing this paper today, as you're considering the budget, is that part of our budget, that 6.67 million, will form part of that pooled fund from the 1st of April if this council and other councils across the region and the health board are so minded to approve a paper similar to this when they come forward. The important point to note and to be aware of in consideration of this pooled fund, that it is a non-risk sharing pooled fund. So Monmouthshire money and Monmouthshire money from our budget, which goes into that pooled fund, will and can only be spent on Monmouthshire residents, similar for the other authorities and the health board responsibilities, and that will be the case until all organisations make a decision to move to a non-risk sharing pooled fund. So in a sense, it's our money in, our money out. You can ask then, what's the purpose of doing this? The aspiration, and I guess the benefits which are set out within the paper, is that this will enable us to move to integrated regional commissioning arrangements for care homes, which would be a benefit. As you can see from the paper, there's a lot of money spent in this area, but the pattern of provision doesn't match the need and the projected demographic demand going forward for care home provision. So Welsh Government legislation means we're starting with the money, but the real benefits are through those integrated commissioning arrangements.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claire, and we do appreciate you being here today when you're obviously not very well.
I'm fine, but my voice is...
I think we have questions, first of all, from Councillor Davis and then from Councillor Eason. Did you have a question, or maybe you were just stretching? Councillor Eason.
Maybe a bit of a cynical question. By bringing these together, you say that Monmouthshire residents will support Monmouthshire residents. We've seen with the United Kingdom Health Board, which controls dementia, which we will have some input into. Is this the thin end of the wedge that we could see the same sort of retrenchment across Gwent in a period of time, or have I got the wrong end of the stick? We're seeing a possible loss of dementia care within Monmouthshire. We provide dementia care within our care homes. Is this a watering down of what we're able to provide, or am I being too cynical?
I think this provides a real opportunity in terms of taking forward commissioning together. So we've been having a lot of discussions both within the council and within regional settings around the opportunity for the redevelopment of dementia care home facilities in the county, in the south of the county, looking at the budgets and the commissioning arrangements in an integrated sense, I think provides a forum and a platform for taking that forward, which if we were just looking at this as Monmouthshire on our own and trying to access regional capital funding via the Integrated Care Fund or health and housing money, which will also come via the Regional Partnership Board from Welsh Government, we wouldn't be in such a positive position. I think working as 5 authorities, vis-a-vis the Health Board, also presents opportunities. So I'm probably a little less cynical and trying to make sure that we're taking the opportunities that this push towards even further integrated working will afford us.
Thank you. Are you happy with that response, Councillor Eason? Councillor Grocart?
No complaints at all about the report, fully support it, but being a total pedant and an ex-teacher, could we get rid of the typo in the subject? We want an integrated commissioning, not integrated. So before he goes anywhere else, could we just correct the spelling mistake?
Thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions on the paper that's been presented as agenda item 6? Councillor Fox.
No, I haven't got anything further on your agenda. It's just that whilst we were all together, I think Phil alluded to it at the beginning, we have to be very mindful of the weather this week. And of course, on Thursday, we're due to set the budget. I think the weather forecast is certainly looking like it's going to be very heavy snow on Thursday, but I'll be working with officers today to identify a fallback date. But I think we will need to you'll need to keep your eyes open for an email on Wednesday evening or something to give us the nod if it's on or not, and hopefully we'll find an alternative date much sooner than later. I just hope that snow doesn't hang around, and let's hope it doesn't affect us too badly. But we'll have to make a call, so please just keep your eyes on your emails. I don't want people trying to get here on Thursday and we've cancelled it, so just keep your eye on it.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, could I just ask if a decision was made on the Wednesday? Because I have found in the past when there's been cancelled meetings that effectively they're sort of sent out about 8:30 when I've already set off. Or, alternatively, some of the emails that come through don't necessarily come through at the same time. They might be sent at 8 and then arrive at 10 or something. Thank you.
I think I'm sure it's not beyond the wit of us to be able to drop an email. It may be early in the morning, so some of you might need to switch on at 7 o'clock to have a look at your emails. I know lots of you do, but if it's obvious on Wednesday night, we can do something then. But we'll have to make a call on the early Thursday morning.
Thank you, Councillor Howard.
Yes, Chairman. Could Democratic Services make calls to whoever, and then I'll send that out to my group if there is an issue, because some of us do not pick emails up probably till later on in the morning or whatever. We may not pick them up on Wednesday, but I will let them know today, and I will make sure that they do not come here until they hear from Democratic Services whether the meeting's on, and I will formally text, or we've all got the devices to do it all. And I think the email for me isn't as good as what we think it is, because people do not have connections or whatever. So we leave that with Democratic Services to make contact with us.
Thank you for that
As
very important
leaders.
point. Kelly, would you like to comment? Will it be a ring around if the meeting is cancelled? So both will be done if that's the case. So can I just thank everybody for their contributions this morning. I think the meeting's gone extremely well. For Mr. Tony Crowhurst for coming along, and also to the officers for dealing with the queries and questions too. But thank you all very much. The meeting is now closed.